Welcome back to the Quilting Stories podcast. I'm Jeff Rutherford, and you can find me on Instagram at Jeff Rutherford. And I'm joined on today's podcast by my co-host, Elaine Poplin, a quilter from Huntsville, Alabama. And you can find Elaine on Instagram at Messy Goat. And I wanted to just briefly say about this podcast for just a moment. We realize that we've been very sporadic in releasing episodes. We do have plans to record more interviews. So if you enjoy this podcast, just keep us subscribed in your favorite podcast listening app. And hopefully you'll be listening to more interviews from us soon. And we're excited today to be interviewing quilter Ann Feitelson. Ann lives in Western Massachusetts, and in addition to the quilts that she makes, she was trained and worked as a painter. And Ann's quilts have been selected and on display at several of the Modern Quilt Guild's QuiltCon shows, also the Vermont Quilt Festival, and Quilts Equal Art Equals Quilts at the Schweinfurth Art Center in Auburn, New York. And you can find Ann's quilts on Instagram at Feitelson Ann, and that's spelled Feitelsonaann on Instagram. And Ann, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thank you.
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, you trained as a painter originally. Can you tell us how you transitioned into making the quilts that you're making now?
Well, first, I was an art major in college. Then I made some quilts. Then I worked as a painter. Then I stopped painting. And then I discovered quilt making for real. So that's the summary. Backing up into a little more detail, I'm so lucky that I was able to see the 1971 show at the Whitney Museum in New York City called Abstract Design in American Quilts, which was in 1971. I graduated from college in 1972. And the summer I graduated, I was hand piecing some flying geese in admiration and emulation of what I had seen at that Whitney show. And I made a few quilts then, but I was already consumed with pursuing a career in the arts. And I went to an art school in New York City and was very serious about painting for about 10 years and didn't do any quilts then. And I sort of burned out on painting then and did other arts related things, which included having an internship at the University of Massachusetts in arts administration. And that's how I was introduced to the work of quilter Michael James, whose work I loved at first sight. And I was allowed to call him up and say, we would like you to come visit us, to show us your quilts, to prospectively make a quilt for the motor vehicle department in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. Anyway, I met him then and I started taking classes with him. That would be in the 1990s. And I really, at that time, I was not painting, but I was knitting passionately. And I thought, oh, this will help me with color and design in my knitting. And it really was kind of a repeat of what I had done as a college art major, but it was all kind of new and exciting doing it with him. And he showed the work of contemporary quilt makers in those classes. So, but they were just paint and paper and color and design until 1999, the class I took with him. In that class, we used fabric, and that's when I started quilting.
That's great. Well, can you describe, I know that this is an audio interview, but could you try to kind of describe in general the types of quilts that you currently make?
Well, that's an interesting challenge. Sure. What I love more than anything else is color. I mean, it just is so lyrical and delicious and infinitely varied. So I like to work with color sequences, and, a rainbow is a sequence, or light blue to medium blue to dark blue is a sequence. And I like to combine color sequences. So you might put light blue next to yellow and medium blue next to orange and dark blue next to red, and so on. And Michael James did that kind of thing in the strip pieced quilts he made, back in the 70s and 80s. So I love color and I love color sequences. And, the training that I had as a painter all derives from the lineage of the abstract expressionist painter Hans Hofmann, who was a widely popular and legendary teacher and was the teacher of my teachers. So to really condense the lessons from him, it has to do with push-pull and dynamic composition so that one thing is in tension in relation to another. Well, I guess that could suffice as a description without any quilts in front of us.
I noticed there's a tremendous amount of geometry.
I'm curious for those listening who may not be familiar with kind of the impact of the Whitney Museum show that you mentioned earlier. Can you tell us kind of some of the quilts that were on display? And I would imagine that was probably the first time that quilts had been shown in a modern museum in the U.S.
True. That's true. That's why that show is so important. And it was the days of big abstract color field painting, and these collectors, Jonathan Holstein, and I forget his partner's name right now, but the quilts became an equivalent of the large abstract paintings that were popular and notable and important and, kind of, loved and worshipped almost at the time anyway by art lovers. So the quilts are, they were vintage quilts. There were flying geese quilts or Amish bars quilts, big, colorful quilts with lots of museum space around them. It was just kind of breathtaking to see a lot of gorgeous big quilts beautifully displayed.
When you are thinking about or planning a new quilt, you mentioned earlier that color is really vital and important to you in your quilt making. Is that what you start thinking about, or are you thinking about shapes? What's that kind of creative process like for you?
Well, I could only say it's multi-dimensional or multifactorial. Sometimes there's a germ of an idea of, I just want to try this certain block. But there's other ideas that have been marinating for quite a while in my head that are personal, about just like looking. I have a series of quilts about the cosmos, or I think they're about the cosmos. They're about lots of different circles, which to me are planets and moons and orbs and galaxies. So, and then there's another theme that I really love working with, which is food. And I've done a number of quilts on the theme of cake, of making a hexagon that looks like a square piece of cake. So, one thing kind of leads to another. So, and sometimes, I want to make another one. I feel that there's more unexplored, not yet explored possibilities in the themes that I've already worked on. But they all, over time, it all kind of builds up, or they build on each other. So I can use leftovers from one project in another. So there's my personal ideas. There's seasonal kind of color that affects me. I mean, the colors I tend to use in summer are different than winter, although sometimes in winter I'm reacting against all that bleakness and they go bright. Color, themes, shapes, blocks, previous quilts. I'll stop there for now.
Sure. Well, you mentioned earlier about how when you saw this Whitney show you were doing some handwork. I think you mentioned, I can remember if you mentioned half square triangles or flying geese. And I'm curious, once you discovered Michael James and the process that you talked about earlier, I guess what I'm trying to get around to asking is, I know that a number of people who originally get into quilt making first start from kind of a commercial pattern or kind of a traditional pattern. I'm curious, given your background as an artist, did you just kind of dive in terms of doing your own thing?
I pretty much did, yes. Because the class with Michael that I started I had made the flying geese quilt and another one, what do you call that? Rail fence back in the early 70s. But he, in the class that I took with him in 1999, this is commonly done. I think Kate Fassett does the same thing in his classes. You pass out postcards or reproductions of works of art that are inspiring and beautiful in themselves, and then say, somehow or other, make something based on this. So you could interpret it however you want. And what I chose or was given in that class in 1999 was an Indian miniature, which, has a whole lot of detail and color. It's not a generalized kind of image. It's an accretion of many tiny things. But so I kind of, imagined breaking it down into small units, and there were a lot of soldiers or something. So each little 3x5 rectangle that I made represented one of the soldiers. So there was that one, and very rarely, or, maybe at the very, very, very beginning, I did use a pattern. But, I have so much experience of drawing and painting. I had painted landscapes and still lifes and from the model, that I wasn't really ever hesitating to do something my own way.
Sure.
And by the way, there's a lot of ways I can use color sequences. Michael strip pieced them, but I can, make one star, make a group of stars, even though they're not adjacent a color sequence, and the background behind them a different color sequence, or there just seemed to me to be infinite ways to use color sequences.
Absolutely. I noticed on your website a lot of geometric shapes. And are you drawn to geometry in particular, or is that, do you have a mathematical drawing background, or is it just...
I'm not particularly mathematical, but when I started quilting around 1999, there was no quote unquote modern quilt movement then. Of course, everything that's made in the present is modern because it's not, I'm not looking, I look towards the past some, but at any rate, what you make now is contemporary. But the kind of division in the quilt world then was art quilt or traditional quilt. And okay, I like symmetry and asymmetry. I like to have kind of both of those things to some extent. But now, the modern quilt movement has changed everything. Wait, what did you ask me? I'm sorry.
The geometric motif. I guess for the unity of it.
Right. No, but so, the art quilters are really into soft focus and printing and painting and embellishment. And I don't want to go back to painting. I don't want to paint on my quilts or get too messy. And then I like finished edges. So I'm not a big fan of, applique with raw threads hanging out on the edge. So if you're going to sew it together, you got to have some geometry to be able to sew it together.
True. I was trained by a painter, so.
Say that again?
My mom is a art school graduate painter and a quilter. And so she and I both went through the art quilt phase around that same time. and have both gone back to the geometry.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm with you.
And then I love, I spent, 5 years or so knitting very intensively. I wrote a book called The Art of Fair Isle Knitting, and that was kind of the bridge for me between painting and quilting. And, the geometric pattern yields this effect of infinity, all the stars in the sky, or Indra's net, or, just vast grids, I think are deeply appealing to us in a certain way as an escape from our own finitude.
I agree. I love playing with geometry and finding new ways to use the same shapes so that they're there and then they're not, and then they're there. And I see a lot of that in your work.
Yes.
So it's fun. You use the structure and then mess with it with color to make it disappear and come back.
Right.
It's quite innovative, exciting to see. It's really, I'd like to encourage anyone listening to this to go to her Instagram feed or Ann's website to see what she's done, because it's pretty amazing.
Thank you.
So sorry, didn't mean to geek out on you there. Okay.
Not at all.
See, I'm a recovering geometry teacher, so I do a lot of the same. I love color and love the color play, but I like the structure that you can get so that you can force the color to interact within a structure, and I see a tremendous amount of that.
Mm-hmm.
So. Very cool.
Well, talking about pattern and structure, didn't you participate in the new quilts from an old block? I think that's what it's called, or I could have the name
new
wrong.
New quilts from an old favorite. Yes, yeah, I entered that contest many times, maybe as many as 10, and I didn't always get in, but I usually got in, and it was useful for a while for me because it solved the problem of what to do next, of like, here's this block they want you to use. And okay, now I don't have to wade through everything. Although now, I have enough impetus in the ideas that I already have. But I liked using the traditional blocks, with that prompt from them.
And I'm wondering if you can talk, I know that, and some people who have seen your quilts in passing may not be aware of this, but I know that there is a particular fabric with birds that you have repeatedly used in many of your quilts. I wondered if you could talk about that.
Sure. Actually, I was very lucky to have been invited to visit a friend in the Peace Corps in Africa in 1984, and he was in Mali. And among the many things we did there was, I did there, was shop for fabric. And I brought back a variety of fabrics, and one of them had little blackbirds that are, say, about an inch long, and they were within these wavy stripes, and the stripes kind of undulated over them and undulated under them, and each bird was framed by an undulation of stripes, and they were on an orange background. And so I've had that fabric for 40 years or whatever it is now, and it has sentimental significance from having been there. But then there was a quilt show where a woman who called herself the African Fabric Lady was selling some indigo and white fabric that is horizontal stripes with birds in ovals interrupting the stripes. And I bought all that she had then. I just adored it and used it until I used it up, and hunted for more of it on the internet futilely for quite a while. But eventually I discovered that the manufacturer called Vlisco, Vlisco, in the Netherlands makes that print in many different colors, and it's called Speed Bird. And because there's a few legends that I've read. One of them is like money flies just like the birds fly, or something like that. But I also read that it was kind of the print used on the upholstery in the African airlines. But the bird in the oval, it's just a beautiful, poignant image to me. And so I've cut out the oval and appliqued it into some of the quilts on the cosmic theme. So it kind of looks like a bird flying on a turquoise sky. Yeah. So, I mean, you have to you can buy it in 1 yard increments now, but I get it from a company called Urban Stacks, URBANSTAX, in Britain, and they import it from Ghana. So the very same image is manufactured both in Africa and in the Netherlands, and it's all called African fabric. And there's other images of birds in African fabrics. And I mean, I kind of collect fabrics with bird prints, and I'll put them in. It's just kind of a nice way to reference or suggest the sky and the infinitude of the sky by putting a bird in.
Very cool. And I like the history of your friend in the Peace Corps. That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as you mentioned earlier, you do use a lot of color and a wide color palette. So are you constantly building your stash?
Well, it's pretty well built up right now. Yeah, I have a lot by now. So sometimes if I'm working on something and I want a sequence or a blend, sometimes I over dye the fabric I already have. I might put yellow and a black and white in pink dye, and the yellow will turn orange and the black and white print will become pink with black dots. Or, I can take a green and white stripe and make it dull green or blue green. So if I really need a color for a blend, I will over dye.
So do you have a dedicated space in your home?
No.
For dye?
No, I'm not up to speed on that. And, I use the dyes from Joann's, and you can just do it in, I'm not dyeing massive amounts of fabric, so if I've got a yard of something, I might put, an eighth of a yard of 10 different fabrics in that dye bath. And because what I want is many shades of related, sort of similar colors.
Yes. Yeah. We had a house fire that destroyed my supplies for it, but I briefly got into Procyan dyeing, and my carport was where quilters came to dye. So, but yeah, I don't do it anymore. It was fun.
Yeah, those are more complicated. And I had a friend locally who moved away, but she really knew what she was doing with the dyes, and she held my hand and coached me through making several shades of one color and the diluted concentrate. But I'm just a little more slapdash about it now.
Yeah, it's a patience issue for me, I think. I want to move on to the next thing.
Well, yeah, we all have the things that nobody can believe we're patient enough to do, and then the other things that we're just like, I'm just going to get this done. So, one person's patience is another person's eternity. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Well, actually, speaking of that topic, I know, because I know you personally and have watched you work on many quilts. I've seen you tear apart a quilt at the very end because there's one color that's not working for you. I'm just curious. You seem to be kind of fearless along those lines. Is it because you know that it would bother you if you didn't go in and fix it?
Yeah. Fearless is one word, but neurotic.
When you said it, I didn't.
Yeah. Oh, I admit it, but I mean, I just can't help wanting it to be the best it can be and wanting the color to sing. And if it doesn't look right, then I'm not happy and then I need to fix it. And I can drive myself crazy. I mean, I really don't recommend my process to anybody else. And, sometimes I kind of get a little stuck in a rut where I'm spinning my wheels and I'm all focused on, this one circle. And if I can't find the right, I can't find the yellow green that's not too yellow and not too green, and I'll drive myself crazy for a while. But it's just that's just part of how I work.
I respect that. I mean, I don't have no fear of the seam ripper, and I think it's a wonderful tool.
Oh yeah, I mean, I have taken pieces out of quilts that are already quilted. I undo the quilting and then I take the piece off and then I have to hand applique it back in and then I fix the quilting. I mean.
Yeah, well, Jeff will tell you that you and I are kindred spirits in that vein.
So speaking of the quilting, do you do a lot of your own quilting or do you use a long armor?
I basically do it all myself. On very rare occasions, I've had somebody else do it, like if I'm giving a quilt as a gift, and I don't want to spend the extra several weeks or months or whatever it becomes. But some of the times when I have used somebody else, it doesn't feel like mine anymore after somebody else worked on it. And so I do them. I'd rather just do them myself.
So what kind of machine do you have while we're talking about it? What kind do you use to piece and what do you use to do your quilting?
It's a Bernina Virtuoso 153, and I think I've had it for 20 years or so. So it doesn't have a very big throat, but I can get the quilts through it to quilt them. And I mean, the thing that I haven't mentioned that I do with the machine is I applique, but I don't hand applique. I machine applique with polyester monofilament in the top and cotton in the bobbin and a blanket stitch. So the machine does a very nice job of that.
Very good. Did it take you a long time to get proficient at that? I've struggled some with turning corners.
Well, I don't tend to do corners. I tend to do circles when I am appliquing. Well, I did have a friend who's a great technician, and we collaborated on a quilt with circles, and she kind of pioneered that method for us and then for that quilt. And then I continued to use it, but it's pretty, I mean, I don't know if that's out there anywhere as a suggested method, but, the machine, it sets itself up to do that quite readily. It's just a blanket stitch.
Excellent. Yeah, I've done some, but I'm never quite satisfied, so I haven't done a lot.
Well, you gotta tighten the bobbin down by running the bobbin thread through that extra little holder. That helps.
Okay. I wonder if that would work on a Janome. I've used a Bernina before. I was actually trained on a Bernina, but I don't know. I'm kind of afraid to mess with the Janome.
Well, you're not actually changing the I mean, I don't know anything about Janomes, but you're not really changing the tension. That little hole to run the bobbin thread through is right there for just that purpose.
Yeah.
On a Bernina, anyway.
Yeah. So I'm not sure we even have the extra hole in the, I don't think we do.
And so when you're quilting, are you doing a lot of straight line quilting?
Yes. I'm not a fan of the doodles and stipples and scrolls that are popular and sometimes look beautiful. What really interests me, is the color and the design, and the quilting interests me much, much less. So I want the quilting to be relatively simple. So straight parallel lines are easy to do. I mean, I don't want to spend forever on the quilting, even though I don't mind spending forever on the color. And there's another quilting motif that I commonly use, which now has a name of modern wave, but I have a ruler that has gentle curves. So you kind of go up, down, up, and then you move the ruler up an inch and over an inch, and then you get a beautiful kind of flowing bunch of curves. So I like that motif for quilting. It looks like the wind when I put it in the cosmic quilts, which is nice.
So you've mastered using rulers on a domestic machine. I've never been able to do that. I always think I need another arm.
Well, no, I'm I put the quilt on the floor and I put the ruler on the quilt and I draw along the edge of the ruler for the curvy ones. And I draw with the purple vanishing marker or with the white chalk. But when I do the straight lines, I put the quilt on the floor and I run what's called artist tape, which is masking tape with no residue and the right pH, along the edge of the ruler. And then I sew along the edge of the masking tape.
Okay. Well, I feel more worthy.
No, I wouldn't know how to get a ruler next to my moving needle. I wouldn't know how to do that.
Yeah, I have friends who can do it, and I'm just baffled. And I'm even ambidextrous, and I can't do it. So it's okay. More power to you. I need another arm.
That would be good. Well, the machine gives you the knee lift and the foot pedal. I mean, it knows how to make the most of your body parts.
Yes, absolutely. Janome too. So they're figuring it out. Sewing machine companies are getting much kinder to us, I think. But until they come out with another arm for me, I think I'm still just going to be up a creek.
So when you're working on a quilt, are there any favorite rulers or tools or notions that you find yourself using over and over?
Well, for the circles, I will gather them around freezer paper, which the circular rotary cutter doesn't really work very well for me. Either the paper or the fabric is always shifting underneath it. So I will trace a circle and then cut out the freezer paper to stabilize the circle. But I also use the plastic template circles. I think it's Karen K. Buckley perfect circles and bigger perfect circles. And those are really nice and crisp and perfect circles, and you can gather really tight against them. So I get a really nice crisp circle using that. And I really like, well, I already mentioned the polyester, whatever it's called, polyester thread, monofilament polyester. And sometimes the block lock rulers I like those. And I like the ones I've done a bunch of quilts with 6-pointed stars, and the templates that the company is owned by Marty Michelle, and it's called From Marty Michelle. And I like her templates because they have the blunted corners, which helps you line them up.
Right. Yeah. I have a stack of those sitting on my quilting table. I haven't used them though.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you should. Just jump in, Jeff. I mean, with some random fabric sitting there, just go for it.
Yeah, there's a quilter. I never can remember her name. In Australia, who has a pretty active blog, Gnome Angel.
Oh yes.
And she has released a number of free patterns using the Marty Mitchell templates, and that's why I ended up buying them. So, it's on my list of things to work on. So I mentioned earlier that your quilts have been exhibited on display at several of the quilt cons, Vermont Quilt Festival, and Quilts Equals Art Equals Quilts. Are you actively submitting your quilts to various shows?
Yes. I mean, I get gratification when they get accepted or get ribbons or get published for sure. And by the way, also having entered that New Quilts from an Old Favorite contest, my quilts were at the National Quilt Museum in Paducah several times too. And they were published. They would publish a little book of the 18 finalists in that contest every year. but I don't think they hold the contest in the same way anymore.
Right.
Which is a shame because it's so lovely to see more, the older traditional ancestry of quilting.
Yes, it was a great idea.
Life. Yeah.
Great idea. And our local guild used to do something similar of choosing a quilt in the collection of a historic museum and asking us to be inspired by it. And that was how I got into doing the 6-pointed stars, was they provided a quilt. They said, do something with this. And I was like, that is really hard. It took me quite a while to master those. But then I made quite a number of quilts using that geometry. So
were those hand-pieced or Y-seams or?
I had hand-pieced, not hand-pieced at all. And there were a couple of more experienced piecers and sewers who did guide me initially, but then I made my own modifications, and a little article was published in Quilter's Newsletter magazine. I think it was April 2005. I'm not positive about that. But anyway, my technique of how I do the 6-pointed stars was published.
Nice.
That's great. Yeah, I agree about the new quilts from an old favorite. I have several of those books, and I really like that concept. I tend to not work as fast as other people, so I was never able to submit to any of the contests, but I always liked that whole concept of taking a traditional pattern and then reinterpreting it and
yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, every quilter, every quilt does reinterpret something from the past too. So,
agreed.
Yeah,
definitely. And I think it's important to realize where we came from so we know where we're going to.
Well, I don't know that we know where we're going. But
well, no, but we have a better idea of, the potential. Just, I don't know. I'd love to see the new plays on tradition.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's very important to value the past.
Yes. So, and that's something that tends to frustrate me a lot in modern quilting, is the rejection of past.
Well, it's complicated.
Yeah, it is. It is. So I'm a traditional quilter, but I'm not. So it's frustrating for me because I learned from traditional quilters. And so it's, I don't know. I just like to pay homage to it.
You can. You don't have to do what the other people are doing. Or
oh, no. I have a problem with authority. I can't follow patterns.
Well, no, but you can incorporate a traditional block any way you want to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'm curious, in the quilts that you've made, do you have a favorite quilt that you've made?
Well, I mean, my favorite is usually the one I'm working on at the moment. But the one that's the front page of my website, which is called Many Moons, which is one of those kind of cosmic ones, is one of my favorites. It's got the bird on turquoise flying through the sky and lots of circles kind of orbiting, and a great big blue space. And a lot of those quilts have to do with times that I've been in Provincetown and watched the sunset at Herring Cove. And it's really pretty cool that you can be on the East Coast and see the sun setting in the west because of the way the Cape curls around. And people drive up to that beach just to watch the sunset. It's spectacular. And I've done that many, many times. So that kind of event or that feeling of like watching the drama of being on Earth and, orbiting the sun is just really powerful to me. So that's that. And I put it as a cover or whatever cover image on my website because I love it.
Yeah, that one's
And
gorgeous.
that website for people listening is annfeitelson.com. And I'll have a link to that in the show notes as well.
Thanks.
Very, very cool. Yeah, I'm very,
do you
very
have any
inspired.
shows upcoming that your quilts will be on display at or exhibited at?
Well, yes. I mean, the little local library in my hometown, my now hometown of Montague, I'm having a small show there. We're installing it in a few days. It'll only be up for a couple weeks. So, for your audience, I don't think this is particularly relevant, but it's very nice that they asked me, and I'm heading off to Quilts Equal Art Equals Quilts in a couple weeks, and I have some quilts submitted to QuiltCon already right now, and I have one more to have photographed and send to them. And I will be entering the Vermont Quilt Festival, which kind of feels like a second or third home to me. So for next June.
That's great.
But I want to thank you very much. I'm very excited looking at your work.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And I do encourage anyone listening, if you're not familiar with Ann's work, to check her out. Again, her Instagram is Feitelson Ann, and that's FeitelSonAnn. And again, we've been speaking with quilter Ann Feitelson. And Ann, thanks for doing this interview.
Thank you so much, Jeff.